Picture this: thousands of years buried beneath the earth, hidden in the ruins of ancient cities, lie small, unassuming clay tablets. To the untrained eye, they might look like nothing more than broken pieces of pottery. But these fragile fragments hold secrets that rewrite history. Among them, the story of a king who built the world's first empire, a ruler whose name echoed across millennia, Sargon of Akkad. How could the legacy of such a towering figure vanish so completely, only to resurface in the quiet language of clay? This is a tale of conquest, loss, and an astonishing rediscovery that changed everything we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization. Sargon's reign was nothing short of revolutionary. In a time when cities stood alone, he united them under a single banner, creating an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. His name became legend, whispered by kings and scribes for generations. Yet, as empires rose and fell, his story faded into myth. For centuries, historians wondered, was Sargon even real, or just a figment of ancient imagination? Then, in the dusty ruins of Mesopotamia, archaeologists unearthed the answer. Those humble clay tablets, etched with delicate cuneiform script, held the key to unlocking his forgotten world. What makes this discovery so extraordinary isn't just the story of Sargon himself, it's the miracle of its survival. Imagine the odds: fires, wars, the slow erosion of time, and yet these fragile records endured. They survived because of the very material that seemed so ordinary: clay, baked hard in the sun or in the heat of a burning palace. Through them, we've pieced together not just the life of a king, but the birth of an idea, that words written down could outlast empires. Join me as we trace this incredible journey, from the rise of Sargon's Akkad to the moment his name was rediscovered, and explore how the past speaks to us, even when we thought it was lost forever. The story of Sargon begins like something out of legend, abandoned as a baby, set adrift in a reed basket on the Euphrates River, only to be rescued and raised by a humble gardener. But this was no fairy tale. From these unlikely beginnings, Sargon would rise to become one of history's most formidable conquerors. By uniting the warring city-states of Mesopotamia under his rule, he didn't just build an empire, he invented the very idea of empire itself. His military genius reshaped warfare, employing strategies like siege tactics and organized supply lines that future rulers would copy for centuries. But his brilliance wasn't limited to the battlefield. Sargon transformed governance, replacing local rulers with loyal governors and standardizing trade and law across his vast territories. For the first time, distant lands from the silver mines of Anatolia to the cedar forests of Lebanon were bound together under a single system. What truly set Sargon apart, though, was his understanding of power beyond the sword. He knew that to last, his legacy needed to be written down. Scribes in his court meticulously recorded his victories, his decrees, even the daily workings of his administration, pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay that hardened into permanent records. These tablets became the blueprint for how future empires would document their own glory. Yet despite his foresight, even Sargon couldn't prevent the inevitable. After his death, the Akkadian Empire began to crumble under rebellions, famine, and invasions. The very clay tablets meant to preserve his memory were scattered, buried under collapsing palaces or carried off as loot by conquerors. For a time, it seemed Sargon's name might vanish entirely, reduced to half-remembered tales told by firesides. But clay, as fragile as it seems, has a stubborn way of surviving. The irony is striking: the same material that recorded Sargon's greatness also outlasted the empire he built. While later rulers like Hammurabi would borrow his methods, the man himself became a ghost in history's shadows. Yet those scattered tablets held clues, waiting patiently in the ruins of cities like Nippur and Ur. They survived not because anyone intended to preserve them, but because clay, once fired by accident or design, becomes nearly indestructible. So when archaeologists centuries later brushed away the dust, they weren't just uncovering broken pottery. They were piecing together the lost chapters of a story that changed the world. And that's where our journey takes its next turn, because the rediscovery of Sargon's legacy wasn't just about finding old artifacts. It was about deciphering the very language they were written in, a code that had been silent for millennia. Even the mightiest empires are no match for time. After Sargon's death, the Akkadian Empire began to unravel like a fraying rope, its strength slowly giving way to forces both human and beyond human control. Rebellions erupted in the conquered cities, their people chafing under distant rule. Invasions poured in from the mountains and deserts, as rival kingdoms saw weakness where once there had been unshakable power. But perhaps the greatest blow came not from swords or spears, but from the sky itself, a catastrophic drought, now known as the 4.2 kiloyear event that turned fertile lands to dust. Rivers shriveled, crops failed, and famine spread like a shadow across the empire. Cities that had thrived under Sargon's rule were abandoned, their streets emptying as people fled in search of water and food. Palaces and temples crumbled, their clay tablets, once the heartbeat of administration, buried under layers of wind-blown sand and collapsed walls. The very language of Akkad, the tongue of conquerors and kings, began to fade as new powers rose and scribes adapted to new rulers. Over generations, Sargon's name slipped from memory, surviving only in fragments of stories, half-remembered and distorted by time. What remained of his empire became little more than a whisper, a ghost lingering in the ruins of places like Agade, his capital, which vanished so completely that archaeologists still debate its location. Yet in that silence, the seeds of rediscovery were already taking root. The tablets that recorded Sargon's deeds, though scattered and forgotten, had not turned to dust. They lay hidden beneath the earth, waiting for a time when their wedge-shaped marks would speak again. The drought that helped destroy the Akkadian Empire also preserved its legacy, baking the clay records harder, shielding them from decay. For centuries they slept while empires rose and fell above them. The world moved on, unaware that the first great conqueror's story was still there, pressed into the clay, ready to be heard once more. Centuries rolled by, and Sargon's name became little more than a whisper in the wind, an echo buried under layers of dust and newer, louder stories, while other ancient heroes like Gilgamesh thrived in the imaginations of later generations, their deeds preserved in epic poems recited around campfires. Sargon's legacy fractured into scattered fragments. The difference: Mesopotamia's written traditions, once so meticulous, didn't flow unbroken like the Nile's steady current. Instead, they rose and fell with each conquering wave, leaving gaps where memory should have been. Think of it like a library ravaged by time. In Egypt, the pharaohs carved their histories deep into stone, ensuring even their failures would endure. But in Mesopotamia, where clay was the canvas, records were fragile, easily shattered, melted down for reuse, or simply lost when cities changed hands. Sargon's story survived only in cryptic king lists, dry catalogues of rulers with no context, and in later legends so distorted they might as well have been about a different man altogether. The Babylonians and Assyrians remembered him as a shadowy figure, a founding father whose deeds were grand but whose details blurred like ink in the rain. Yet while Sargon faded, the very tools that erased him also preserved him. Unlike stone, which could be defaced or quarried away, those humble clay tablets, insignificant to later invaders, were often left undisturbed. They lay buried in the ruins of temples and palaces, waiting like time capsules. And then, in the 19th century, something extraordinary happened. Archaeologists, armed with shovels and curiosity, began peeling back the layers of forgotten cities. At first, they didn't know what they held. A broken tablet here, a partial inscription there, but slowly, painstakingly, the fragments started to align. The wedge-shaped strokes of cuneiform, once the language of empire, began to speak again. What they revealed was astonishing. These weren't just inventory lists or tax records, though there were plenty of those too. Mixed in with the mundane were proclamations, hymns, even personal letters that painted Sargon's world in vivid color. A receipt for grain shipment suddenly became proof of his far-reaching trade networks. A broken hymn praising his victories hinted at the awe he inspired. And then the crown jewel tablets that named him directly, recounting his rise from obscurity to the throne. After millennia of silence, the king who built the first empire was stepping back into the light. The irony, it was the very fragility of clay that saved him. While later conquerors chiseled away at monuments, no one thought to erase these unassuming tablets. They were buried, not destroyed, waiting for a future that could finally read them. This was more than just archaeology. It was a conversation across time, a reminder that history isn't just written by the victors, it's also preserved by the overlooked. The same material dismissed as ordinary became the key to unlocking the extraordinary, and as scholars pieced together the puzzle, they realized something profound. Sargon's legacy hadn't vanished. It had been hiding in plain sight all along, pressed into the earth, one fragile tablet at a time. The 19th century dawned with a mystery buried in plain sight, thousands of clay tablets covered in strange, wedge-shaped markings, scattered across the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. To most, they were curiosities, mute relics of a forgotten past. But to a handful of determined scholars, they were a challenge, a linguistic puzzle begging to be solved. This was the birth of Assyriology, a field that would crack open the sealed vault of Mesopotamian history, and in doing so, resurrect Sargon's lost legacy. At the forefront stood figures like Henry Rawlinson, a British officer whose fascination with ancient inscriptions bordered on obsession. His breakthrough came at Behistun, a sheer cliff face in modern-day Iran where the Persian king Darius the Great had carved his triumphs in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Like the Rosetta Stone for Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Behistun inscription became the key to unlocking cuneiform. Rawlinson risked his life scaling the cliff to make rubbings of the text, painstakingly comparing the known Old Persian with the unknown Babylonian script. Slowly, letter by letter, the code began to yield, but deciphering was only half the battle. As scholars pieced together the grammar and vocabulary of Akkadian, the language of Sargon's empire, another race began, the hunt for the tablets themselves. Excavations at sites like Nineveh and Nimrud uncovered vast libraries of clay records, many still intact in the rubble of palaces and temples. Among them were the tablets that mentioned Sargon directly, not as a myth, but as a flesh and blood ruler whose deeds were meticulously recorded. The irony was poetic. The very administrators who once used these tablets to track taxes and troops had unknowingly preserved their king's story for posterity. What emerged was a revelation. Sargon wasn't just a name in a dusty king list, he was a strategist, a reformer, a man who understood that empire required more than conquest. His scribes had recorded everything from military campaigns to diplomatic marriages, from trade agreements to temple offerings. Each fragment added another brushstroke to the portrait of a ruler who shaped history. And it was all there, waiting in the clay for the right minds to piece it together. The scholars of the 19th century didn't just decode a script, they resurrected a world. The dust of centuries hung thick in the air as Austin Henry Layard's team chiseled through the ruins of Nineveh, the once great capital of the Assyrian Empire. Each stroke of the brush revealed something extraordinary, not gold or jewels, but row upon row of clay tablets, stacked neatly in what had been the library of King Ashurbanipal. Here, in the 7th century before the Common Era, a monarch obsessed with knowledge had amassed a treasure trove of texts, from royal decrees to medical treatises. But buried among them were relics of a far older world, tablets that spoke of Sargon of Akkad, a name that had faded into myth centuries before Ashurbanipal was even born. The scene must have been breathtaking, workers carefully lifting fragile tablets from the earth, their surfaces still sharp with cuneiform script. Many were perfectly preserved, hardened by fires that had raged when Nineveh fell to invaders in 612 BC, fires that ironically baked the clay into near indestructibility. Layard, with no formal training in archaeology, couldn't have known the full significance of what he'd found. To him, these were curiosities, artifacts of a civilization mentioned in the Bible. But among them were fragments of the Sargon legend, a text recounting the Akkadian king's miraculous rise from foundling to ruler. The Assyrians, who saw themselves as heirs to Sargon's legacy, had copied and recopied his stories, unknowingly becoming the guardians of his memory. There's a profound irony here. Ashurbanipal, a conqueror in his own right, sought to gather all human knowledge under one roof. His scribes scoured Mesopotamia for ancient texts, painstakingly transcribing them onto fresh clay. In doing so, they rescued Sargon from oblivion, not out of reverence, but simply because his name lingered in the old tales they collected. The library wasn't meant to preserve the past, it was a tool of power, a way to control the present. Yet history had other plans. When Nineveh burned, the tablets sank into the rubble, forgotten until Layard's picks and shovels brought them back to light. What emerged from the dirt was more than just a record of kings and battles. These tablets revealed how Sargon's story had been reshaped over time, how later rulers like Ashurbanipal had rewritten his legacy to serve their own ends. Some texts praised him as a model king, others cast him as a cautionary tale of hubris. The very act of rediscovery forced scholars to confront a startling truth: history isn't fixed. It's a living thing, molded by each generation that retells it. And now, with these fragments in hand, the real work began, piecing together not just what the tablets said, but what they meant. The words were there, waiting in the clay, but unlocking their secrets would require a new kind of deciphering, one that went beyond language to touch the heart of how we remember and how we forget. Deciphering the wedge-shaped marks pressed into those ancient tablets was like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces were missing. Early scholars faced a daunting challenge. Cuneiform wasn't just one language but many, evolving over centuries from Sumerian to Akkadian and beyond. The key to cracking it open lay in an unexpected place: bilingual texts where the same passage was written side by side in a known language and the mysterious script. Picture a Rosetta Stone scattered across hundreds of broken clay fragments, each one offering a tiny glimpse into a linguistic labyrinth. Take the lexical lists, for example, ancient dictionaries scribes used to train new generations. These weren't just dry vocabulary drills, they were time capsules preserving word meanings long after the languages had faded. A single list might pair Sumerian terms with their Akkadian equivalents, allowing modern researchers to reverse engineer entire vocabularies. But the real breakthroughs came from royal inscriptions, where kings like Sargon boasted of their triumphs in formulaic phrases that repeated across tablets. Like recognizing a familiar refrain in an unfamiliar song, scholars began to spot patterns, names, titles, and epic events that matched fragments from other sites. Yet every discovery came with complications. Scribes weren't perfect. They made mistakes, miscopying signs or mishearing dictation. Later editors sometimes updated older texts to suit contemporary politics, blurring the line between history and propaganda. A tablet praising Sargon's military genius might have been altered centuries later by a Babylonian king eager to link himself to the legendary ruler. Even the myths that grew around Sargon, like his miraculous rescue as a baby, posed challenges. Were these poetic embellishments, or did they hold kernels of truth? The tablets rarely distinguished between fact and folklore. What emerged from this painstaking work was a portrait in fragments, a mosaic where some tiles shone clear while others remained stubbornly opaque. Scholars had to weigh administrative records against epic poems, royal decrees against schoolboy exercises. A receipt for temple offerings might confirm the scale of Sargon's building projects, while a damaged hymn hinted at the cult of personality surrounding him. Slowly, the man behind the myth began to take shape, not just as a conqueror, but as a ruler who understood the power of the written word to shape his legacy. And that legacy, as the tablets revealed, was far more complex than anyone had imagined. The story of Sargon's infancy reads like something torn from the pages of myth. An abandoned child, set adrift in a reed basket on the Euphrates, only to be plucked from the waters by a humble gardener. Sound familiar? Centuries later, strikingly similar tales would attach themselves to other legendary figures, from Moses in the bulrushes to Cyrus the Great, hidden as a baby to escape royal wrath. These echoes aren't coincidence, they're part of a recurring motif, a narrative blueprint ancient cultures used to signal destiny. But here's the twist: while Moses and Cyrus belong largely to legend, Sargon's existence is etched in clay. His birth story, preserved in a tablet from the Neo-Assyrian period, blurs the line between history and folklore, forcing us to ask, was this dramatic origin story crafted to legitimize his rule, or did it contain a kernel of truth? Later generations couldn't resist reshaping Sargon's legacy to suit their own needs. In Babylonian texts, he becomes a cautionary figure, a conqueror whose arrogance invited divine punishment. One tablet recounts how the gods, angered by his pride, turned against him, bringing famine and rebellion. The Assyrians, meanwhile, recast him as a model king, a divinely chosen ruler whose military prowess mirrored their own imperial ambitions. These competing portrayals reveal more about the cultures that preserved them than about Sargon himself. Like clay reused by scribes, his story was scraped clean and rewritten with each new era. Separating fact from fiction requires peeling back these layers. Modern historians play detective, comparing administrative records dry but reliable with the flowery language of royal inscriptions and the moralizing tone of later legends. A tax receipt listing grain shipments to Sargon's army carries more weight than a hymn praising his divine birth. But even the myths hold value, showing how his memory was weaponized, venerated, or vilified across millennia. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle, a ruler extraordinary enough to inspire legend, yet human enough for his flaws to become fodder for moral lessons. What emerges is a portrait not just of a king, but of how history itself is made a collage of fact, propaganda, and collective memory. The same tablets that preserved Sargon's name also transformed him, proving that legacy is never set in stone. Or rather, in clay. Untangling the threads of Sargon's legacy requires more than just reading ancient tablets. It demands a detective's eye for detail. Historians approach his story like a mosaic, piecing together fragments from royal inscriptions, economic records, and even the ruins of cities themselves. Take his military campaigns, for example. Later chronicles boast of conquests stretching to the cedar forests of Lebanon and the silver mountains of Anatolia. But how do we know these aren't just poetic exaggerations? The answer lies in mundane clay receipts, shipping logs for timber and metal, tax records from newly conquered cities, even ration lists for soldiers stationed in distant forts. These dry administrative documents, often overlooked, become the bedrock of verification, proving that Sargon's reach wasn't just propaganda. But not every claim holds up under scrutiny. The famous World Empire description, repeated in later Babylonian texts, likely inflated his actual territorial control. Excavations reveal that some regions, like southern Sumer, resisted Akkadian rule far longer than official annals admit. Even the location of his capital, Agade, remains one of archaeology's great mysteries. No definitive ruins have been matched to its legendary grandeur. This is where science steps in. Soil samples from suspected sites show sudden spikes in trade goods like lapis lazuli and copper during Sargon's era, hinting at centralized wealth. Satellite imagery maps ancient road networks radiating from a lost hub, while pottery styles abruptly unify across Mesopotamia, silent witnesses to imposed cultural standards. The controversies don't stop there. Some scholars argue that Sargon's famous reforms, standardized weights, measures, and trade routes, were actually gradual developments credited retroactively to burnish his reputation. Others point to cylinder seals bearing his officials' names found hundreds of miles apart, physical proof of an administrative web only an empire could weave. What's remarkable isn't the debate, but how it's conducted through collaborative efforts across disciplines. Linguists decode the nuances of Akkadian verbs that might imply temporary conquest versus permanent control. Chemists trace the origins of clay tablets through mineral signatures, revealing which records were written locally and which were copied later. At the heart of it all are the artifacts that anchor Sargon to history beyond words. A broken statue base from Nippur, inscribed with his name, shows where his likeness once stood. A shattered victory stele, its remaining fragments depicting bound captives, mirrors descriptions of his triumphs. Even something as simple as a clay sealing, a lump of clay stamped with a royal insignia used to secure a long-vanished door, becomes a tangible link to his bureaucracy. These objects don't just corroborate texts, they add texture to them, turning a legendary king into a ruler who touched everyday lives. From the grandest inscription to the humblest receipt, each piece forms part of an intricate puzzle, one that's still being assembled, one careful fragment at a time. Among the countless clay tablets recovered from Mesopotamia's ruins, a handful stand out as game-changers, fragile yet defiant pieces that reshaped our understanding of Sargon's world. Take the Sargon Chronicle, unearthed in the library of Ashurbanipal. Unlike dry king lists, this tablet pulses with personality, recounting his rise from obscurity with vivid detail. The humble gardener who raised him, the coup against his city's ruler, even the moment he washed his weapons in the sea after conquering distant lands. The words aren't just history, they're propaganda crafted with flair, designed to awe subjects and rivals alike. Yet buried beneath the grand narrative are nuggets of truth, geographical names matching archaeological finds, administrative terms corroborated by tax records. This single tablet, cracked and incomplete, became a Rosetta Stone for decoding Sargon's psychology as much as his politics. Then there's the Nippur cylinder, a clay roll etched with Sargon's pious declarations. Found in the sacred city of Nippur, it boasts of restoring temples and pleasing gods, a stark contrast to the warrior king image. But read between the lines and it reveals his genius for soft power. By funding shrines and adopting Sumerian religious titles, he co-opted the spiritual authority of the very people he'd conquered. The cylinder's survival is itself a miracle. Fire had baked it harder than its scribe ever intended, preserving prayers meant to burnish a reputation across millennia. Perhaps most intimate are the letters. One fragile fragment, now in the Louvre, captures a scribe's frantic message about grain shortages in a northern outpost, proof of the empire's logistical strains. Another, found at Tel Brak, records a governor's plea for troops to quell unrest. These aren't grand monuments, they're snapshots of a bureaucracy in motion, the mundane paperwork that held an empire together. Holding one is like eavesdropping on history. The cuneiform indentations still crisp under fingertips after 43 centuries. The emotional weight of these objects defies explanation. To touch a tablet bearing Sargon's name is to bridge a chasm of time, feeling the same ridges pressed by a scribe who might have glimpsed the king himself. Their survival seems almost defiant, baked by accident in palace fires, buried under collapsed walls, ignored by looters who sought gold, not clay. In their quiet resilience, they outlasted the palaces they documented, the armies they supplied, even the language they were written in. These unassuming slabs of earth didn't just record history, they became its unlikely guardians, whispering Sargon's legacy across ages when stone monuments crumbled to dust. Clay has a quiet stubbornness that defies expectation. While papyrus crumbles to dust and parchment cracks with age, a fired clay tablet becomes nearly indestructible, a fact that saved Sargon's story from vanishing entirely. Unlike the Library of Alexandria, whose scrolls burned in a single catastrophic blaze, Mesopotamia's records were scattered across thousands of unassuming clay fragments, each one hardened by time or accident into something as enduring as stone. When palaces burned during invasions, the heat didn't destroy these tablets, it baked them stronger, turning administrative receipts and royal decrees into ceramic time capsules. The very disasters that toppled Sargon's empire also became its unlikely archivists. As cities like Agade collapsed, layers of mudbrick and debris sealed tablets beneath the earth, shielding them from looters who prized gold over clay. Floods deposited silt over ruined libraries, while shifting desert sands buried whole districts like a protective blanket. What seemed like oblivion was actually preservation, a natural vault locking away history until the right moment. Even the elements conspired to help. The dry climate of Mesopotamia prevented the clay from reabsorbing moisture and softening, while the lack of heavy rainfall kept inscriptions crisp over millennia. Modern technology has cracked this vault wide open. Advanced imaging techniques like reflectance transformation photography can now reveal faded cuneiform invisible to the naked eye, while 3D scanning preserves fragile tablets digitally before they're even unearthed. Chemists analyze clay composition to trace a tablet's origin, proving which records were written in Sargon's court versus later copies. Even broken fragments find new life through algorithmic matching software that scans thousands of pieces to identify joins based on edge patterns or script alignment. The same material that survived empires now yields secrets to pixel-perfect cameras and artificial intelligence. The greatest irony, those ancient scribes pressing stylus into wet clay never imagined their work would outlast dynasties. They were keeping tax records, not writing history, yet their mundane diligence recording grain shipments, troop movements, even complaints about late wages became the backbone of a rediscovered legacy. The fires meant to erase cities became the kilns that preserved their stories, and now, as scientists peer beneath surfaces with multispectral imaging and reassemble fragments with virtual tools, we're not just reading history, we're conversing with it, one stubborn clay tablet at a time. Imagine holding a clay tablet so fragile it might crumble at a touch, its surface etched with faint marks that haven't been read in thousands of years. Until recently, these artifacts were trapped in a cruel paradox, too damaged to decipher, yet too precious to risk handling. Now, thanks to the quiet revolution of digital archaeology, these silent witnesses are finally speaking. Advanced CT scans, originally developed for medical imaging, peer through layers of corrosion and calcification like X-rays for history, revealing cuneiform strokes hidden beneath the surface. Projects like the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative are stitching together a virtual tapestry of these scans, making high-resolution images of tablets, including those mentioning Sargon, freely available to anyone with an internet connection. It's as if we've been handed a key to a locked archive, one that spans continents and centuries. But the breakthroughs don't stop there. Artificial intelligence is now tackling challenges that would have stumped scholars a generation ago. Machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of known cuneiform signs can predict missing fragments of broken tablets, like a linguist's version of autocomplete. Other programs analyze the angle and depth of wedge marks to identify individual scribes, essentially fingerprinting the hands that wrote Sargon's decrees. In one remarkable case, AI cross-referenced a disputed fragment from the Louvre with digitized texts in Berlin, proving it was part of a long-lost hymn praising Sargon's military campaigns. These tools aren't replacing human expertise, they're amplifying it, allowing researchers to spot connections across vast datasets that no single mind could hold. The implications ripple far beyond academia. For decades, access to cuneiform tablets was limited to a handful of scholars who could physically visit museum vaults. Now, a high school student in Mumbai or a retired teacher in Buenos Aires can zoom in on a 3D model of a Sargon-era tablet, rotating it under digital light to catch every nuance. Crowdsourcing projects invite the public to transcribe unread texts, turning global volunteers into collaborators in rediscovery. This democratization of history is rewriting not just what we know about Sargon, but how we know it, breaking down barriers between experts and enthusiasts, between institutions and the curious public. Yet the most profound revelation lies in what these technologies suggest about the future of our past. Every unread tablet in a museum basement, every crumbling inscription still buried in the ground, represents a potential breakthrough waiting to happen. As imaging tools grow sharper and AI more intuitive, we're on the verge of a second renaissance in Assyriology, one that might uncover lost chapters of Sargon's rule, or even texts from kings whose names we've yet to learn. The clay tablets that survived fire and flood now face their greatest transformation, not as relics behind glass, but as living documents in a digital age, whispering their secrets to anyone willing to listen. For centuries, the story of civilization's rise was told with Europe at its center, a narrative that placed Greece and Rome as the cradle of governance, philosophy, and imperial ambition. But the rediscovery of Sargon's legacy shattered that illusion, proving sophisticated states with complex administrations thrilled more than 2,000 years before the Parthenon's marble gleamed under the Mediterranean sun. Here was an empire with standardized weights and measures, a professional bureaucracy, and diplomatic networks stretching across the known world, all documented in meticulous clay records. The implications were profound. The roots of civilization didn't lie west of the Aegean, but east, in the Fertile Crescent where scribes had been keeping records before the first stones of Stonehenge were raised. Sargon's influence reverberates far beyond his military conquests. His model of governance, centralized authority, regional governors, and state-controlled trade became the blueprint for every empire that followed, from the Babylonians to the Persians and beyond. Even the concept of divine kingship, where rulers claimed legitimacy through a special connection to the gods, found one of its earliest expressions in his reign. A tablet from describes him as the Anointed of Enlil, a title that would echo in the coronation rituals of later monarchs across the ancient world. What's striking isn't just the sophistication of his system, but how thoroughly it was forgotten, and how dramatically its recovery rewrote the timeline of human progress. This revelation wasn't isolated. Just as Sargon's tablets forced historians to reconsider the origins of empire, other archaeological discoveries have upended long-held assumptions. The unearthing of Pharaoh Hatshepsut's defaced monuments revealed a powerful female ruler erased from official records, while the decipherment of Mayan glyphs exposed a civilization with advanced astronomy and mathematics thriving while Europe languished in the Dark Ages. Each of these discoveries shares a common thread. The victors of history don't just write the narrative, they sometimes bury it, leaving later generations to piece together the truth from fragments. Yet for all we've learned, the haunting question remains: what else lies beneath our feet, waiting to be found? The same soil that yielded Sargon's tablets likely holds other lost chapters, treaties signed in forgotten languages, poems praising kings whose names we've never heard, even entire cities still hidden under the silt of millennia. Every shovelful of dirt removed in Mesopotamia brings us closer to another potential revelation, another crack in the wall of what we think we know. And if the past is any guide, the next great discovery won't come from a golden treasure chest, but from something far humbler, a piece of clay hardened by time, bearing marks that whisper across the ages. The lost capital of Akkad lingers like a ghost in the archaeological record, a city so powerful it gave its name to an empire, yet vanished so completely its ruins have never been positively identified. For over a century, scholars have scoured the plains of modern Iraq, following clues both ancient and cutting-edge, hoping to uncover the heart of Sargon's realm. Satellite imagery now reveals faint geometric patterns beneath croplands near Baghdad, the shadows of massive walls and canals that might mark Akkad's footprint. Sediment cores drilled from the Tigris floodplain tell another story. Layers of pottery fragments and ash deposits dating to Sargon's era, hinting at a metropolis swallowed by shifting river courses. The prize isn't just architectural bragging rights, it's the potential for intact archives, chambers of clay tablets frozen in time, perhaps even Sargon's own palace records waiting beneath the silt. What makes the hunt so tantalizing is the sheer scale of possibility. Unlike later capitals like Babylon or Nineveh, which were rebuilt over centuries, Akkad's glory was brief. Abandoned after the empire's collapse, its location fading from memory. This means any discovery would be a pristine snapshot of Sargon's world, untouched by later renovations or looters. Early theories placed the city near modern-day Fallujah, where 19th century explorers found bricks stamped with Akkadian inscriptions. More recent surveys suggest it may lie further south, beneath the sprawling suburbs of Baghdad itself, where construction crews occasionally unearth cuneiform fragments amid sewer lines and foundation pits. The irony is bitter. The very urban growth that threatens to erase these clues also proves humans still cluster where ancient greatness once thrived. Yet the search is fraught with challenges beyond geography. Modern Iraq's turbulent politics and conflict zones make excavation perilous, forcing archaeologists to rely on remote sensing and chance finds. Satellite-based ground-penetrating radar has mapped anomalies near the ancient city of Kish, massive structures aligned with celestial events, possibly part of Sargon's ceremonial complex. But verifying these leads requires boots on the ground, a luxury rarely available in regions where heritage sites have been casualties of war or targets for illegal antiquities trade. Even when digs proceed, ethical dilemmas arise. How to balance scholarly urgency against the rights of communities living atop these ruins, or the risk of attracting looters by publicizing discoveries. The stakes couldn't be higher. Finding Akkad wouldn't just solve a historical puzzle, it could rewrite our understanding of how empires functioned at their birth. Every broken brick or charred grain silo would offer clues about how Sargon's administration fed its armies, taxed its subjects, or projected power across distant provinces. And somewhere in that lost city, beneath layers of dust and time, clay tablets may still lie in the precise order a scribe left them 43 centuries ago, preserving conversations between kings and generals, merchants and priests. Until then, Akkad remains archaeology's ultimate cold case, its secrets hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right combination of technology, perseverance, and luck to finally speak. The dirt covering Iraq's ancient ruins tells more than one story, not just of kings and empires, but of modern struggles to protect what's left of them. For archaeologists working in Mesopotamia today, the greatest threat isn't time or weather. It's the chaos of conflict. Wars since the 1990s have turned sites linked to Sargon into battlegrounds, with looters tunneling through crumbling walls in search of artifacts to sell on the black market. Satellite images reveal moonscapes of pits where once there were temples and palaces, entire layers of history stripped away overnight. Yet amid this devastation, a quiet resistance has emerged. Iraqi archaeologists, often risking their lives, have hidden thousands of tablets in secret storage rooms or painstakingly documented looted sites before they vanish entirely. One team in Basra even disguised an excavation as a construction project, working under cover of darkness to map a crumbling Akkadian-era administrative building before urban sprawl swallowed it whole. The illicit trade in stolen antiquities is a shadowy global network, with Sargon-era tablets appearing everywhere from auction houses in London to private collections in Tokyo. Some bear the scars of their journey, broken edges where they were hastily pried from excavation layers, erasing crucial context about their origins. Yet occasionally, these artifacts find their way home. In 2019, a cuneiform tablet mentioning Sargon's campaigns was repatriated to Iraq after a decade-long legal battle with a New York museum. Forensic epigraphy analyzing the clay's mineral composition proved it had been looted from a site near Kirkuk. Such victories are rare but symbolic, revealing how science can sometimes undo the damage of greed. Museums now walk a tightrope between showcasing Sargon's legacy and avoiding complicity in this trade. Institutions like the Iraq Museum in Baghdad have adopted radical transparency, publishing digital catalogs of their collections so stolen items can be identified. Others use 3D replicas to display fragile tablets while originals remain secured. The British Museum's Iraq scheme trains local archaeologists in rescue techniques, equipping them to stabilize sites after looting or bombing. Meanwhile, scholars are racing against time to digitize at-risk artifacts, creating virtual backups of inscriptions that might not survive the next conflict. These efforts reflect a profound shift in how we preserve history, not as trophies behind glass, but as fragile links to a shared human story. Every recovered tablet is a victory, but the real challenge lies ahead, protecting the sites still standing, where undiscovered chapters of Sargon's world may yet lie buried. The question isn't just how we safeguard these relics, but whether we can honor their legacy by learning from the forces that nearly erased them. Walking through the British Museum's Mesopotamia gallery feels like stepping into Sargon's world, glass cases filled with clay tablets bearing his name, their wedge-shaped script still sharp after millennia. One fragment, no larger than a smartphone, captures a scribe's urgent message about troop movements along the empire's northern frontier. Nearby, a royal seal depicts Sargon in profile, his beard curled in the Akkadian style, pressing the emblem into wax to authenticate decrees. These aren't just artifacts, they're fragments of a living bureaucracy frozen in time. But the most striking object might be the Bassetki statue base, a broken bronze pedestal inscribed with Sargon's titles, proof that his likeness once loomed over subjects in some long-lost square. Touching the cool metal, you can almost hear the echoes of a kingdom that reshaped history. The museum's collection sparks heated debates, though. Many of these pieces arrived in London during the 19th century, taken by archaeologists like Austin Henry Layard when Iraq was under Ottoman rule. Critics argue they belong back in Baghdad, where they're part of a living cultural heritage. Defenders counter that institutions like the British Museum offer global access, preserving fragile objects with technology local museums might lack. The tension is palpable. In one corner, schoolchildren cluster around a touchscreen translating Akkadian poetry. In another, Iraqi visitors pause before a stele, their expressions unreadable. One scholar told me of a Kurdish refugee who broke down weeping before a tablet mentioning her ancestral city, proof that Sargon's legacy isn't just academic but deeply personal. Beyond scholarly disputes, these objects have a way of igniting imaginations. A novelist might linger over a merchant's receipt, picturing the caravan routes it represents. A game designer studies siege descriptions for historical accuracy. Even the museum's gift shop tells a story postcards of Sargon's inscriptions outselling Egyptian pharaohs some months, a quiet testament to his resurgent fame. The real magic happens when someone leans close to a tablet, squinting at cuneiform they'll never fully decipher, yet feeling the weight of history all the same. What these encounters reveal is how Sargon's story transcends time. His empire fell, his language faded, but the ideas he unleashed: centralized power, cultural assimilation, the written word as a tool of control, echo through every modern nation. The same clay that recorded tax rolls and treaties now inspires artists, diplomats, and dreamers. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of these museum halls. History isn't just about the past. It's about who we are now and who we might yet become. Sargon's influence stretches far beyond dusty tablets and academic debates. His shadow looms large in the stories we tell today. Think of the ruthless, charismatic conquerors who dominate our screens and pages, from the scheming emperors of Game of Thrones to the galaxy-spanning tyrants of Star Wars. George Lucas himself drew inspiration from history's great empire builders when crafting Palpatine, a ruler who, like Sargon, consolidates power through military might and political cunning. Parallels are uncanny. Both rulers understood that true dominance required more than armies. It demanded control over culture, religion, and the very narratives that define a society. Even Frank Herbert's Dune echoes Sargon's legacy, with Paul Atreides ascending from obscurity to lead a vast interstellar empire, his legend carefully crafted through propaganda and myth. These modern tales tap into the same primal fascination that ancient scribes felt: the allure of power, the tension between order and tyranny, and the slippery line between hero and villain. But why does Sargon's archetype still resonate? Perhaps because his story mirrors our deepest anxieties and aspirations. In a world where leaders still rise and fall amid chaos, the idea of a unifying force, whether savior or dictator, holds undeniable dramatic weight. Video games like Civilization let players step into Sargon's sandals, building empires that span continents, while dystopian novels warn of the costs of unchecked ambition. Even the Assassin's Creed franchise, with its sprawling historical settings, nods to Akkade's legacy in its portrayal of ancient power struggles. These adaptations rarely mention Sargon by name, but his fingerprints are everywhere. the strategic marriages, the bureaucratic innovations, the cult of personality that blurs the man and the myth. The real lesson, though, lies not in how Sargon inspires fiction, but in how fiction reshapes our understanding of him. Every retelling, whether a blockbuster film or a gritty graphic novel, asks us to reconsider what makes a ruler great. Is it the stability they impose or the freedoms they erase, the monuments they build or the voices they silence? Sargon's Rediscovery forces us to confront these questions not as abstract debates, but as living history, proof that ideas buried in clay can outlast stone, steel, and even the empires that spawned them. As we near the end of our journey, that resilience becomes the most compelling thread, the quiet power of words to endure, adapt, and speak across millennia. History has a way of playing tricks on us. The same Sargon who once commanded armies and reshaped continents nearly vanished entirely, not in battle, but in the slow erosion of memory. His story teeters between legend and fact because of a fragile chain of preservation, a handful of clay tablets that survived war, fire, and time. It forces us to confront an unsettling truth that the past isn't lost in dramatic collapses, but in quiet neglect. For every Sargon rediscovered, how many rulers, inventors, or thinkers slipped away without a trace? The ruins of Mesopotamia still cough up fragments of unknown kings, their names etched on broken bricks, their stories reduced to a single line in a ledger. Consider the irony. Sargon's records outlasted empires because they were written on something as humble as clay. Yet today, in an age of clouds and servers, our own histories might be far more vulnerable. Digital data decays faster than baked earth. Hard drives fail, formats become obsolete, websites vanish overnight. A single solar flare or cyber attack could erase more knowledge than the burning of Alexandria's library. We've traded the permanence of clay for the convenience of pixels, but at what cost? Archaeologists can still read 4,000-year-old cuneiform, but try opening a floppy disk from the 1980s. The lesson here isn't just about technology, it's about intentionality. Sargon's scribes didn't expect their tablets to endure millennia. They were keeping track of grain shipments. Yet their daily diligence became an accidental time capsule. Meanwhile, we produce more information than any civilization in history, but much of it exists in ephemeral forms: tweets, disappearing messages, unbacked photos. Future historians may face a paradox: drowning in data, yet starving for substance. Imagine trying to reconstruct our era from corrupted PDFs and broken hyperlinks. This isn't just an archival problem, it's a cultural one. Societies preserve what they value, and what survives often reflects the biases of power. Sargon's story was saved because later kings found it useful. Lesser figures faded into silence. Today, whose voices are we failing to safeguard? Indigenous languages disappearing without record, community histories locked in decaying cassettes, the diaries of ordinary people tossed during basement clean-outs. The digital age could democratize preservation, but only if we actively choose to save more than just the loudest narratives. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't about what we've lost, but what we're losing right now. Every minute, irreplaceable knowledge vanishes: oral traditions, dying dialects, unrecorded innovations. Climate change threatens coastal archives, wars erase entire libraries. Yet solutions exist. Projects like the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine or UNESCO Memory of the World program show it's possible to fight back. The real challenge is recognizing that preservation isn't just for historians, it's a collective responsibility. After all, the clay tablets that saved Sargon's legacy weren't created as gifts to the future. They were simply someone's paperwork kept with care. In the end, that's all any era leaves behind: the fragments we didn't throw away. Sargon's story whispers a warning across the centuries. Civilizations don't just fall to invaders or disasters, but to the slow erosion of memory. Those clay tablets survived because they were duplicated, scattered across cities, baked hard by accidents of history. Today, we face the opposite problem, an avalanche of digital data that could vanish in an instant. Unlike Sargon's scribes, who etched records into nearly indestructible clay, we store our most vital knowledge on servers vulnerable to hacking, magnetic decay, or simple neglect. The irony is stark. Our era produces more information than any in history, yet much of it is more fragile than 4,000-year-old receipts for barley shipments. Projects like the Arctic World Archive recognize this paradox. Buried deep in a frozen mountain on Svalbard, this vault stores global knowledge on microfilm, a medium that, like clay, requires no technology to decode. Governments, corporations, and even GitHub have deposited backups there, from democratic constitutions to open source code. The goal isn't just preservation, but redundancy. The same principle that saved Sargon's legacy when copies of his decrees turned up in Nippur, and Nineveh. Decentralization matters. When wildfires threatened California's historical archives in 2020, librarians rushed to digitize records, scattering copies across servers worldwide. Like ancient scribes sending duplicate tablets to regional governors, they understood. Survival depends on never keeping all your memory in one place. But preservation isn't just for institutions, it's a personal act. Every deleted social media post, every corrupted hard drive full of family photos, represents a tiny cultural amnesia. Unlike Sargon's clay, our digital footprints fade without deliberate effort. Simple choices matter: printing cherished photos on archival paper, backing up files in multiple formats, even keeping paper copies of critical documents. The Mesopotamians baked their records hard by accident. We must do so by design. Beneath all this lies a deeper truth. The urge to outlast our time is quintessentially human. From cave paintings to blockchain, we've always sought ways to shout into the future. Sargon's scribes couldn't have imagined us deciphering their grain tallies millennia later, yet they pressed those wedges into clay with care. Today, as we encode data in DNA or laser-etch books onto nickel plates, we're answering the same call. The mediums change, but the impulse remains, to say, "I was here," and to hope someone someday will understand. There's something primal about digging, about brushing away layers of dirt to reveal what time has hidden. It's not just archaeologists who feel this pull. Children sift through sandboxes, gardeners turn over soil, and treasure hunters scour beaches with metal detectors. But when we dig for history, we're searching for more than objects. We're chasing connection. The moment in 1877 when a worker at Nineveh uncovered a broken tablet mentioning Sargon's name, his hands trembling as he realized this wasn't just another piece of pottery. That was more than discovery. It was a handshake across 40 centuries. For some, excavating the past is about nationalism, proof of a glorious heritage to unite a fractured present. When Iraq's National Museum reopened in 2015 after years of war, the first exhibit showcased Akkadian artifacts, Sargon's legacy repurposed as a symbol of resilience. Other digs are driven by pure, insatiable curiosity. Think of Leonard Woolley's team at in the 1920s, celebrating not with champagne but with tea and biscuits when they found a tablet describing Sargon's trade routes, their excitement undimmed by the desert heat. Every archaeologist has their eureka story, the sudden glint of a cylinder seal in trench mud, the way sunlight hits a cracked tablet just right to reveal a forgotten king's name. These aren't just professional triumphs, they're deeply personal. One researcher told me about kneeling in a dusty pit, her fingers tracing the indentations of a scribe's stylus, struck by the intimacy of touching words last read when Akkad still stood. What unites these motives, whether political, academic, or emotional, is the hunger to bridge time. Holding a Sargon-era tablet is like picking up a phone with a direct line to the past. The mundane details are what make it breathtaking. A complaint about late wages for canal workers, a love letter between bureaucrats, a receipt for a shipment of wool. These weren't meant for us, yet here they are, whispering across millennia. They remind us that history isn't a parade of kings and battles. It's the sum of countless ordinary lives, most of which left no trace at all. And that's the bittersweet truth of archaeology. For every tablet we decipher, 100 more crumble to dust before we can read them. The past is always slipping away, and we're forever catching fragments mid-fall. Excavation isn't about completing the puzzle. It's about adding a few more pieces to a picture we'll never see whole. When we brush the dirt from a Sargon inscription, we're not just uncovering history. We're admitting how much we've already lost and how much there's still left to find. Even now, with all we've uncovered, Sargon's story remains a puzzle missing critical pieces. Countless tablets lie untranslated in museum basements, their cuneiform markings waiting for eyes fluent in a dead language. Sites like Agade, the heart of his empire, linger undiscovered beneath modern cities or desert sands. And then there are the gaps no archaeology can fill, the personal letters burned to ash, the oral traditions that faded with the last Akkadian-speaking generation, the daily rhythms of life in his court that never made it onto clay. What we have is extraordinary, but it's also fragments, a handful of pages torn from a much longer book. Yet this incompleteness is what makes the search so thrilling. A new generation of scholars is stepping into the field armed with tools Sargon's original excavators couldn't have dreamed of. Multispectral imaging reveals faded ink on seemingly blank tablets, while machine learning algorithms cross-reference thousands of texts to spot patterns no human could detect. In Berlin, a doctoral student recently used 3D modeling to virtually reassemble a shattered hymn praising Sargon's victories, revealing lines thought lost forever. Meanwhile, Iraqi archaeologists are leading digs at sites once too dangerous to explore, uncovering administrative records that rewrite our understanding of Akkadian trade networks. History isn't a static monolith, it's a living conversation, and every fresh discovery shifts the dialogue. What's striking isn't just the new technology, but the new perspectives shaping the questions we ask. Earlier scholars focused on kings and battles. Today's researchers trace the lives of Sargon's subjects, the merchants, farmers, and enslaved people who built his empire. A recently translated tablet from Tel Leilan records rations given to workers constructing a temple, listing women and children by name. Another, found near Mosul, details a legal dispute between two farmers over irrigation rights, proving Sargon's bureaucracy reached even into village squabbles. These voices, long overshadowed by royal propaganda, are finally getting their due. The work ahead is as much about preservation as discovery. Climate change threatens fragile sites with rising salinity and erratic rainfall, while looters still prowl unprotected ruins. Digitization projects race against time to scan crumbling tablets, but funding is scarce. Yet there's hope in collaboration initiatives like the Cuneiform Commentaries Project, where scholars worldwide crowdsource translations, or the open access databases letting a teenager in Nairobi help transcribe ancient receipts. Sargon's legacy isn't just in what he built, but in how we've pieced it back together, a global effort spanning languages, borders, and generations, and that's the real lesson here. History isn't just about the past, it's about how we choose to remember, and what those choices say about us. Sargon's empire fell millennia ago, but the impulse to preserve, to understand, to connect across time. That's as human as the first marks pressed into wet clay. Whether it's a pharaoh's obelisk or a parent's diary, we're all leaving fragments for someone someday to find. The question is, what will they make of us? In the quiet glow of a museum case, a single clay tablet lies illuminated, its surface etched with the faint but unmistakable wedge marks spelling out Sargon of Akkad. This unassuming slab of earth, no larger than your hand, has outlasted dynasties, conquests, and the rise and fall of civilizations. It's a bridge across 4,300 years, a direct line to a world where this name once thundered across battlefields and echoed in palace halls. The story of its burial and rediscovery isn't just about archaeology, it's a mirror held up to history itself, reflecting the endless cycle of loss and resilience, oblivion and revelation. Empires crumble, languages fade, but somehow, against all odds, fragments endure. Think of the hands that shaped this tablet, a scribe pressing a stylus into wet clay, unaware their work would someday be studied under glass. Think of the fires that baked it hard, the sandstorms that buried it, the centuries it spent silent beneath the earth. And then, the moment it was lifted back into the light, its message decoded by scholars who gave Sargon's voice back to the world. This isn't just a relic, it's a testament to the stubbornness of memory, proof that even the mightiest powers are temporary, while the humblest records can become immortal. Yet for every tablet found, countless others are still missing, crumbled to dust or waiting undiscovered. That's where we come in. Supporting cultural preservation isn't just for historians. It's a way to honor the fragile threads connecting us to the past. Visit a museum and stand before these artifacts. Marvel at how something as simple as clay could carry a king's name across millennia. Better yet, help ensure future generations can do the same, whether by advocating for endangered heritage sites or simply pausing to appreciate the ordinary objects that might one day tell our stories. Sargon himself understood the weight of legacy. One of his inscriptions, now housed in the Louvre, carries a line that lingers: "Let future kings read these words and know my deeds." He couldn't have imagined us centuries later doing just that, not as subjects but as curious minds piecing together his world. So the next time you hold something fragile, a notebook, a photograph, a child's drawing, remember the Akkadian scribes. What we choose to preserve, intentionally or by accident, becomes a message in a bottle tossed into time's vast ocean. And who knows, centuries from now, someone might brush the dust from our lives and whisper, "We see you. We remember."